Hi, I'm the Octopus Lady, you're watching Alien Ocean, and we're gonna talk about clownfish today, but we're also gonna talk about something I never thought I was gonna talk about on this channel. Humans. And this is because, as you may know, June here in the United States is LGBTQIA plus Pride Month. And, there's been a lot of bills introduced and laws passed recently that affect transgender and intersex people, and it's not good, and I wanted to use my platform to bring attention to this matter and encourage my audience to learn more about what's been happening, and also to highlight a charity that I've donated to, Interact, which is an organization that advocates for the human rights of children born with intersex traits. If you can, it would be awesome if you could donate too. I've linked to their donation page in the description. But anyway, it being Pride Month is kind of the reason I chose clownfish as my video topic, because they can change their sex. Now, there are some pitfalls you can potentially run into with a topic like that on a channel like this. It can be very easy to make a video about clownfish and say something like, clownfish changed their sex like trans people. This is called anthropomorphism, and it's when you ascribe human characteristics to non-human things. And I do this all the time in my videos. I got sponges that can talk, mantis shrimp who are part of mafia gangs, Victorian-era seahorses suffering from the consumption. I mean, clownfish themselves have been famously anthropomorphized. In day-to-day life, it's mostly harmless. Like, I see trans people on Twitter posting pictures of clownfish with captions like, trans icon, and that's so great! It always brings me such joy when I see posts like that. But in certain contexts, anthropomorphism can be harmful. Saying X animal is like Y group of humans is going to, whether intentionally or not, draw comparisons between the two. And comparing whole groups of marginalized people to animals? Not a good look. It can contribute to the marginalization of these groups by spreading misinformation about them and about the animals in question too. So before we jump into clownfish, I want to clarify a few common misconceptions about sex, gender, intersex people, and transgender people. So first off, what is sex and what is gender? Aren't they the same thing? No, they're not the same thing, but it's okay if you originally thought they were. I thought they were the same thing for a long time too, because that's what I was taught in school. But sex is a biological concept, and gender is a social construct. Sex is basically the physical characteristics that determine whether an organism is a male or a female, what sort of chromosomes you got, what sort of reproductive organs you have, stuff like that. In humans, it's believed that males are those with XY chromosomes, a penis, testes, and they produce sperm. Female humans are those with XX chromosomes, ovaries, a vagina, and they produce eggs. It all sounds very black and white, but you don't have to look far in biology to see this whole idea fall apart, even in humans, which I'm going to get to in a minute. One of my very first existential meltdowns I had making videos for this channel was for my seahorses video, because they were kind of messing with me a little bit. It's the male seahorses who get pregnant, but the female seahorses have this tube that they use to inject their gametes into the males. So couldn't you argue that in a way, their eggs are like sperm? So that got me falling down a rabbit hole into reading papers about what even is an egg, what even is a sperm, and then I found out that scientists have been like, okay, sperm and eggs are out, this is how we're doing it now. The organisms who make a lot of small gametes are the males, and the ones that make fewer, bigger gametes are the females. But then I found out that some organisms have gametes that are the exact same size as each other, and I had to stop there, otherwise I was gonna start crying in a corner. Gender, meanwhile, is a social construct. That's a phrase that gets thrown around a lot, but what does it mean? And okay, look, to be completely transparent, I'm way out of my element right now, y'all. I have a background in the sciences, and the answer to this question comes from like the humanities, right? This is anthropology and sociology and psychology and philosophy and all these things I didn't study back in college because I thought the humanities were a waste of time. God, I was such a snob back then. So I'm going to be using a lot of quotes because I feel like the people who've actually studied this stuff or are from these communities should be the ones to talk to you about them. I shouldn't stumble through awkward paraphrasings of their words, so please bear with me. Let's start with this quote from the Trevor Project. Gender is a social construct, an idea created by people to help categorize and explain the world around them. You may not notice it all the time, but each gender comes with a set of expectations, like how to act, talk, dress, feel emotion, and interact with other people. For example, when you think of a teenage boy living in the United States, what comes to mind? Do you imagine him playing football, or do you picture him dancing in a ballet recital? It's likely that you imagined him playing football first, but why? In the United States, we have very defined gender roles that describe what it means to be a boy or a girl, a man or a woman, and we learn what's expected of us at a very early age. Even though these expectations are made up, there's no reason why boys shouldn't be encouraged to practice ballet, for example. Gendered characteristics, activities, expressions, and stereotypes are really ingrained in our society and shape most of our lives. In reality, gender roles aren't set in stone. Even though our society expects certain things from certain people, we don't have to conform. Rather than on a binary, only two ways of being, gender and sex exist on a spectrum, meaning that there are a lot of different ways that people can express their gender, identity, or sex. Which brings me to my next point. What does it mean to be transgender? What does it mean to be intersex? Are they the same identity? Those are great questions. I'm glad you asked. So no, intersex people are not the same as transgender people. That isn't to say that there aren't intersex people who identify as trans, or transgender people who are intersex, but each identity exists within different identity categories. Again, allow me to quote the Trevor Project. When we are born, a doctor assigns us a sex. This has to do with our biology, chromosomes, and physical body. Male babies are generally labeled as boys, and female babies are generally labeled as girls. But even sex is more complex than that, and it really exists on a spectrum, which we talked about before and we'll talk about a little more in a second. Some people never question their assigned gender or sex and choose to identify with what they were assigned at birth. That's called being cisgender. But there are others who do question their gender or sex, and that's completely normal and okay. If you don't feel that your gender identity, meaning your own personal sense of what your gender is, matches the gender you were assigned at birth, you might identify as transgender or trans. And like sex is an expansive and complex spectrum, so is gender. So a transgender person who was assigned female at birth but identifies as a man is a transgender man. A person who was assigned male at birth but identifies as a woman is a transgender woman. That said, I gotta give a shout out to non-binary people too, who are people who don't really identify as either a man or a woman. They might identify as both or neither or somewhere in between, and while some non-binary people identify as trans, not all of them do. So, in comparison, here's the Intersex Society of North America's answer to the question, what is intersex? Intersex is a general term used for a variety of conditions in which a person is born with a reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't seem to fit the typical definitions of female or male. For example, a person might be born appearing to be female on the outside, but having mostly male typical anatomy on the inside. Or a person may be born with genitals that seem to be in between the usual male and female types. For example, a girl may be born with a noticeably large clitoris or lacking a vaginal opening, or a boy may be born with a notably small penis, or with a scrotum that is divided so that it has formed more like labia. Or a person may be born with mosaic genetics, so that some of her cells have XX chromosomes and some of them have XY. Though we speak of intersex as an inborn condition, intersex anatomy doesn't always show up at birth. Sometimes a person isn't found to have intersex anatomy until she or he reaches the age of puberty, or finds himself an infertile adult, or dies of old age and is autopsied. Some people live and die with intersex anatomy without anyone, including themselves, ever knowing. If you're still a little confused about the differences between these two groups, I've linked to all these resources in the description if you want to learn more. I also just want to say that in a lot of these conversations around anti-trans bills, transgender people get mentioned a lot, but intersex people don't, even though they're being affected by these laws too. A lot of these bills that say that transgender people aren't allowed to get surgery are saying that intersex people have to, and that includes infants. Yeah, it's real bad, y'all. So again, if you can donate to Interact, please do so, because this is what they do. They protect intersex children from getting unwanted surgery. Alright, thank you for bearing with me, everyone. Now, let's move on to talking about clown- Wait a minute, hold on. What do you think you're doing? You're a science channel. Why are you bringing politics into this? Well, I could rant about this for hours, but we need to get to clownfish at some point in this video. I will say, though, science is not as objective as you might think it is, and it does not exist in a void that's separate from the rest of the world, free of bias and prejudice. Science is always being affected by politics. Quite literally. A lot of money that scientists get to do research comes from the government. You know, That place where politicians work? And that's just one example of hundreds I could give. Well, still, you shouldn't be talking about any of this stuff. You know what? You're right. You're 100% right. I shouldn't be talking about this. Whatever decisions trans and intersex people want to make about their bodies is none of my business. It's no one's business. No one should be talking about this, except for trans and intersex people with their doctors and maybe their parents or guardians if they're minors. That's it. Because transitioning or not, starting hormone replacement therapy or not, getting surgery or not, are medical decisions. So you know who definitely shouldn't be talking about this? Politicians. They're literally the ones who made it political with these horrible bills that they're trying to pass. And if they just left people alone to get the healthcare that they needed, then nobody would be talking about this. Anyway, my point is, if you don't like hearing me talk about anything quote-unquote political in my videos, with all due respect, that's a you problem. When I've brought up politics in the past, it's because these are issues and problems that are affecting a huge chunk of humanity, and I have sympathy and empathy towards other people, and if you don't like that, then maybe my videos aren't for you. Oh, but if you don't like hearing me talk about this stuff right now because you're just a transphobe, oh, excuse me, you're trying to protect the innocence of children or whatever nonsense you people are telling yourselves, get off my channel, because I don't want you in my audience and I don't want you in my community. Your kind is so completely and thoroughly unwelcomed here. I'm gonna get so many comments from transphobes now. Anyway, let's finally talk about clownfish today, shall we? So clownfish, or anemonefish as they're also called, are part of the subfamily Amphiprionidae, I think, which is part of the family Pomacentridae. I guess, which I didn't know until now, but that makes sense because the pomacentrids are the damselfish, and they're huge jerks. They're one of the most aggressive fish I've ever met in my life. I'm sure that if you're familiar with damselfish, you know what I'm talking about. And while most of the clownfish I've encountered have been relatively chill, I have gotten headbutted by some of them before. It was very cute. As near as I can tell, they haven't found any clownfish fossils, but a paper that analyzed their molecular clock says that they've been around for around 19 million years. And since I couldn't find a picture of a clownfish fossil, ta-da! It's the return of the skeleton costumes from my moray eel video. Have you seen my moray eel video? You should go watch my moray eel video. And yeah, I know I just named this corner the fossil-free zone, which makes it sound like I should put clownfish in there, but that's for organisms where we know literally nothing about their fossil history, so clownfish don't belong. That probably means this is a bad name for the corner, but I don't care. I really like that name. But anyway, clownfish are found in the warm waters of the Indian and Pacific Oceans, and they're almost always found living, as I'm sure many of you already know, in anemones. What are you doing, you little dork? That anemone isn't for you. You're too big! Clownfish are in mutual symbiosis with anemones, meaning that these two both benefit from their relationship with each other. Interestingly, the anemone also has a mutually symbiotic relationship with the dinoflagellates that live inside of it. And if you don't know what dinoflagellates are, go check out my videos about them. But anyway, the clownfish benefits because they get a nice safe home to live in, because who's gonna mess with them when they basically live in a house where the walls are constantly moving and are full of deadly nematocysts? And if you don't know what nematocysts are, go check out my jellyfish and siphonophore videos. And by the way, while the average reef fish of similar size to clownfish usually only live for about 5 to 10 years out in the wild, clownfish can have a lifespan of up to 30 years. That's how safe and protected they are inside their anemones. Meanwhile, the anemone uses the nitrogen in the clownfish's waste products to keep their dinoflagellates nice and healthy. The constant swimming by the clownfish in between their tentacles increases oxygenation, and they're actually protected by the clownfish too. Animals like butterfly fish and sea turtles like to eat anemones, and clownfish won't hesitate to get into fisticuffs when they feel like their home is being threatened. Although, despite decades of research, we apparently don't really know why clownfish are able to live within an anemone's tentacles and not get stung. There are a bunch of different hypotheses, one of the OG ones being that They were on the right track, baby. They were born this way. I'm sorry. I couldn't help myself. It's Pride Month. Anyway, that hypothesis was basically like, there's just something inherent to clownfish that makes them immune to anemone stings from birth. But we found out that a lot of clownfish actually have to go through an acclimation phase with an anemone when they want to move into it. Like, they can't just boop in. It's a bit of a process that can take anywhere from a few hours to a couple days. They do things like brushing their tails against the anemone's tentacles, nibble on them, or just fan them with their pectoral fins, which some scientists think might activate genes in the clownfish's DNA that protect the fish from stings. But there is some recent research that shows that when anemones and clownfish live together, their microbiomes, which is the collection of microbes that naturally live on and within an organism, start to converge, which could potentially result in bacteria transferring or processing stuff like proteins that could help protect the clownfish. Also interestingly, anemones possess chemical receptors for N-acetylneurominic acid, or NU5AC? NEU5AC? NU5AC? I'm gonna go with NU5AC. I like how that sounds, which is a common component in the mucus found on the skin of fish. When the chemical receptors bind with NU5AC, that triggers the nematocysts to fire. But clownfish have way less NU5AC in their skin mucus compared to other reef fish that don't live in anemones. So while we don't know exactly why these two can live together happily without this one, dying, it definitely seems like there's something going on a molecular level in the mucus of clownfish. So clownfish are what are called sequential hermaphrodites. And we're gonna pause really quick and we're gonna talk about this word. This is a word we use in biology to talk about animals that have fully functioning male and female reproductive parts at the same time. Or they start out with the reproductive organs of one sex and then at some point in their lives switch to the other. This is not a word we use to talk about people in real life. To quote Interact, again, please donate to them if you can, link in the description, hermaphrodite should never be used to describe an intersex person. Some intersex people have reclaimed this word for themselves, but it is usually considered a slur. There are many ways to have an intersex body, but it is not possible for one person to have both a fully developed penis and vagina. The H word comes from mythology. It might suggest that intersex people are monsters or not of this world. So, saying that animal is a hermaphrodite? Cool. Saying that person is a hermaphrodite? Not cool. Not cool at all. Don't do that. Anyway, sequential hermaphroditism. So clownfish are protandrous, which means they first develop into a male, but at some point in their life become a female. Protogynous, by the way, is the term used when an animal first develops into a female and later becomes a male. Sex changes in some of these fish are size dependent, which means that when they reach a certain size, their sex just gets changed. But clownfish, their sex changes happen based on their social environment. See, clownfish live in fairly complex social groups. Within an anemone, there's usually a monogamous pair of clownfish, one male and one female, and up to 4 non-breeding clownfish of no particular sex, because their reproductive organs haven't fully developed yet. The largest clownfish of the bunch is the female, and the second largest is the breeding male, and then all the non-breeders get progressively smaller, depending on their rank. The female and the male can be quite aggressive with the subordinates, mostly as a way to make sure that they don't get any ideas about challenging their position. Sometimes the dominant mating pair will even evict or kill a non-breeder should it start to become similar in size to them. However, something interesting happens when the female dies or is removed from the group. The breeding male will switch his sex and over a period of a few months become a female. Meanwhile, the largest of the non-breeders will develop into a breeding male, and all the other non-breeders grow a little bigger and move up a rank. Scientists say that clownfish queue for opportunities to breed, waiting their turn until someone dies and they can move up a rank, which poses some questions, like why don't the non-breeding clownfish leave? Like, why wait around for maybe the chance to reproduce? Or why do they just wait passively with the other non-breeders? Why don't they fight with each other for who gets to be next in line? Well, let's answer this question first. The anemones that clownfish live in don't take up a ton of space on coral reefs, and the anemones that are there are almost always occupied by other clownfish that you would have to fight if you wanted their home. And they're going to be bigger than you, and they're going to outnumber you. So, odds aren't really in your favor there. And that's assuming that you can even get to another anemone, because clownfish are not great swimmers compared to other reef fish, and they almost always get eaten when they wander too far afield from their home. Also, surprisingly, the odds of successfully breeding is actually quite high for clownfish if they just queue. I was reading this paper that says that a rank 3 clownfish, which is the largest of the non-breeders, has a probability of 0.5 of moving up a rank, which would make it a breeding male, and that probability of moving up a rank increases the lower your rank is. And for the second question, the answer there is pretty simple. Where you are in the clownfish hierarchy determines your size, and if you're smaller than the fish whose rank you're trying to usurp, you're not gonna win. So fighting is stupid. If you're a non-breeder, the fact of the matter is, the best way to get some is to just patiently wait in line for someone to die. So what physically happens to a clownfish when they change their sex? Well, there's about 6 phases in total that clownfish go through to go from non-breeder of no particular sex to fully formed female. So it starts with phase 1, which is when a clownfish is a juvenile and they have both testicular and ovarian tissues, but neither of them are mature yet. Phase 2 is called the pre-ripe male phase, which I do not like the name of that phase. It sounds gross. In this phase, they basically have only spermatocytes and oocytes in their tissues, which are fancy ways to say immature sperm and eggs. Phase 3 is when a non-breeder officially becomes a breeding male, which is called the ripe male phase. At this point, clownfish will have developed what's called an ovotestis, which is a reproductive organ that has both ovarian and testicular aspects, but it's only producing fully functioning sperm, and the oocytes are laying dormant. Phase 4 is the transitional phase, so the testicular tissue starts to degenerate and the ovarian tissues start to develop. This phase, and all the ones that follow, only happen to the breeding male, and only when the female is no longer in the picture. Phase 5 is the pre-ripe female phase, and it's when the testicular tissues have become small and non-functional, and the ovarian tissues are full of oocytes of varying stages of maturation. And then finally, phase 6, the ripe female phase, which sounds so gross, but it's when the ovaries are now fully functioning and the testicular tissue has been reduced to nothing but a narrow band that surrounds the gonad. And ta-da! That's how you go from non-breeder to breeding female in 6 easy steps. Now, we're gonna take another pause here, because I just want to check in and make sure that nobody is thinking, I don't know, this sounds a lot like how transgender people work, because it's so not. If a transgender person decides to transition medically, socially, and or legally, it is a series of big decisions that will have huge effects on their life. These processes can take years, and every trans person's needs, desires, and experiences with transition are different. You can be transgender in so many different ways. Clownfish, meanwhile, don't think about any of this stuff when they switch sexes. Of course they don't. They're fish. When a sex change in a clownfish is activated, it won't sit there and consider all the potential ramifications this can have on its life. It just happens. It's all driven by, uncontrollable biological processes. And another thing, clownfish are not switching their gender, they're switching their sex. Fish don't have gender. Gender, again, is a social construct that humans made up about humans. You can't take it and apply it to fish. So, if you were kind of confused in the beginning about how trans and intersex people aren't like clownfish, I hope it's clearer to you now. But if you identify as trans or intersex, and you do like comparing yourself to clownfish, that's great. I'm certainly not telling you to stop doing that. I feel like part of being human is trying to find reflections of ourselves in nature, and who wouldn't want to see themselves reflected in clownfish? They're cute, and they're brave, and they're beautiful, and everybody loves them. Thanks so much for watching another episode of Alien Ocean. Again, if you're able to, please donate to Interact and help protect the rights of intersex kids. I've linked to them in the description along with a bunch of other resources if you want to learn more about trans and intersex people. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Check out our Patreon where you can get early access to videos or your name in the beautiful credits, and also go check out our second channel, and also go check out my Twitter. I hope everyone is having a really great Pride Month, and if you're someone who is being affected by these bills, I hope you're taking good care of yourself as best you can, and I hope you're surrounded by people who love and care about you. And if you're not, I love you, and I care about you. You're not monstrous, you're not broken, you're not a freak, and there's nothing wrong with you. You're worthy of love and respect and basic human decency, just like anyone else, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying to you. So don't listen to them. Sorry, this just got kind of heavy out of nowhere. Let's close this out. So until next time, this is your friendly neighborhood Octopus Lady, reminding you that while you don't have to go into space to find aliens, it's also important to remember that you might meet some people you think are alien, but once you make an effort to understand them, you'll find out that they're human just like you.